Okay, we've got 31 people in total. I think that's about right. So we'll get going. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to everyone who's sort of listening in. It's good to have you here. This is the fifth in our series, and with hoping to add more dates. Actually, these have been persistently popular, which is much to my surprise. As always, we've got way too much to get through in the hour allotted. So that I'm looking forward to it a great deal. I've got a little presentation just to frame the discussion quickly. That with your permission, panelists, I'll go through. Well, actually, no. Let's introduce ourselves first because this is a good window. I can't point and say you go first, so someone just jump in and we'll go from there. Go on, be brave.
Okay, I'll jump in.
Excellent,
so my name's Alison Davies. I'm an architect in practice in Nottingham. I'm also teach design studio at the University of Nottingham. So I'm two relevant hats here today. So my specialisms in practice, I've been working for 25 years as an architect, and all that time has been with community and voluntary sector projects, including a number of projects under the banners art and play. Also at the university, my particular interest is in the post-war moment and the architecture of public service, specifically the New Towns movement, which used both art and play and the involvement of children as ways to sort of establish a culture for a place that was being built from scratch. That's briefly me.
Okay, well, my name's Fiona Heron. Foremost, I'm a three-dimensional thinker, really. I've worked in private, public domain externally for sort of over 30 years. My approach, I'm very committed to placemaking and an integrated approach to art and design. So my work involves both landscape architecture, which is quite broad, from the conceptual down to sort of detail, which may include, three-dimensional work, which, may include furniture, may include other elements within landscape, sculptures or, points of interest, features in the environment, signage. But I also work on projects alone as three-dimensional artworks outside. My key commitment really is to quality integrated creative thinking, three-dimensional thinking, and how we can have a holistic approach to designing external spaces and how we can bring in sort of creativity to make these, places more understood, appreciated, valued.
Perfect. Thank you, Fiona. Go on, Jo. You're second to last on the list.
Thank you. My name is Jo Fairfax, and I'm what I suppose it would be public artist in one sense, but part of the reason I say that is because I'm not very keen on the idea of public art as a classification or anything as a classification. I think that holistic way of designing, as has just been said, is absolutely the right way. I like the idea that people come together and just simply want to do the best they can to improve an environment. And it's such a complex thing to do that having many good creative minds on it simply makes sense. Whether it's art or architecture or landscape design, that's really not the issue. To me, the issue is how can we make fantastic spaces for people where it's like in the National Design Guide that says they want to promote delight and beauty. And that just seems to me a really good starting point. And then it goes off in whatever direction it goes in. So I like to contribute in whatever role is required to those aims. And I also like the idea that there isn't really an ego involved. So it's not so-and-so did such and such. It's just what can we do collectively to make the very best environment regardless. It doesn't require a name. It just requires the best environment for communities, different communities at different eras.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll introduce myself very quickly. I'm kind of chairing this shindig, but I don't think you can meaningfully chair digitally. So I'll just join in the conversation, but kind of bow to your superior knowledge here. I'm an urban designer by background, and for my sins, I spent quite a bit of time working with the volume house builders. And my particular interest in this is that creative thinking, as you've outlined, rather than just art per se, to me is a cost-effective and viable solution to adding quality that doesn't necessarily involve fiddling around with buildings, which I know, which any of you who've worked with the volume builders will know, they're very reluctant to do too much into the actual buildings themselves. So anything that can be done to improve the setting and the experience of being within places without heaping costs into areas that that make delivery difficult, I'm particularly keen on, because I think we miss so many tricks in terms of how to kind of quality uplift. Before we get into the discussion quickly, I'll introduce why we're here. I've got a kind of mini presentation or a couple of introductory slides, so I'll share that screen now. If anyone wants to jump in and talk over me, feel free. So let me just share this now. So we are all here today because originally, when the National Design Guide was launched in October, there was some money made available by MHCLG to promote it, and part of that was going to be probably a more kind of traditional training program where we would go out to local authorities, elected members, interested private sector organisations, and kind of do a promotional and training package. Obviously, with what's happened in terms of the pandemic issues and just the way in which that's evolved, we very quickly had to either decide to kind of shelve it, or maybe there was a better way of doing it or another way of doing it. And so we moved the whole thing online. Training online, I just don't think would work. You lose the kind of dynamism of the room. So we settled on this discussion format that we've got today. So so we're expecting all participants to have read the National Design Guide, which of course you have. This is a collaborative project, as I said, so we've got MHCLG funding, and then the two architecture centres, Design Midlands and Creating Excellence, are jointly promoting this. Both offer design review services and other ancillary design services that are integral to the kind of place quality agenda. So we're here, we're right at the end of our schedule with our kind of webinar 5. We've done, previous sessions have been on climate, character, community. There was a really interesting one on movement. We're probably going to be adding more dates. This is the sort of thing that could run and run. Some of you will be pleased to know, others will be thinking, oh God. So just a very, very quick overview of what the National Design Guide is. It's very different to what I've certainly been used to in the past in terms of both what it's trying to do and how it's written. If you're familiar, many of you in the audience will be familiar with things like Urban Design Compendium, that kind of thing. They're very much how-to guides. They kind of tell you what you need to do. The National Design Guide is different. It comes up with this idea of outcomes, and it tells you what the characteristics or what you expect to see if you've got design right. And it tries its best to, and I don't think it's entirely possible to do this in a written document, but it tries its best to break down silos and come up with the idea that these things are all interlinked. So you've got these 10 characteristics of a well-designed place. You know it when you see it, and then you've got these 3 overarching themes of the climate, character, and community. And even the way it's drawn in this kind of roundel on the screen here is trying to promote the idea that these are not separate things. They're things you do all together at once. And for the benefit of the audience, we had a pre-meeting and we were discussing this now, I'm sure. So these are the 10 characteristics. I'm not going to read them out to you. It's incredibly boring when someone does that. However, the point is they're all meant to be interlinked. You can go across the pie, as it were, and everything works with everything else. I've got some images here. And Jo, you sent these across very helpfully. So if you want to sort of explain what we're seeing here, and I think that will help as a kind of catalyst for the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. The first one on the left-hand side, the top and bottom, that's in Bury, just outside Manchester. And I put these in as examples of hopefully integrated design that are a focal point. So the striations that you can see on those columns of light, they're picked up from the striations that are on the building that you see in the background. There's also a ribbon of striations that the architect have put in the paving, so that without hopefully over-labouring the point, subconsciously there would be an integration of design that automatically took place when somebody experienced that area. and they were designed so that when people, there are sensors, sorry, in the bottom of each of those columns that detects people's movement. And then there's a 5-second pattern of light that takes place. So you get like a trail of light behind you as you walk through that sort of small area or small sort of wood of light. And then it goes back to a general pattern. I also included this slide because seeing that young person on one of the pieces, I was chuffed to bits because it sort of showed how it became integrated, how I've been designing this and in the studio and all the rest of it, but once it left me, it's not mine. I never like it to be mine. And seeing her sort of appropriate it just filled me with such pleasure. I thought, absolutely, that's brilliant. That I never drew it with a person on it, but it became somebody else's and her experience, whatever that was, and I really like that. The middle one is in Bristol, the new Heart and Lung Hospital. And part of the brief for this was to sort of have as quiet signage. So it wasn't saying it's the Heart and Lung Hospital, but it was saying it was a point of interest. It was a small exclamation mark saying this is the entrance. So that ripple of light that you can just see going 2/3 of the way up, that slowly changes colour through the evening. And it's a point that people will recognise that where the light work is, that is the entrance. The rhythm of that surface replicates the rhythm of a heart operation that I saw, that I didn't enjoy at all, but I saw some poor person having a heart operation, and so used that information. So again, it's very the local context, and the local story was helping me create the design that was that was relevant. And then the third one on the right is in Burnley, and that's at the Weaver's Triangle, which at one point was the most powerful cotton producing area in the world. And this fantastic chimney was right on the edge of this Weaver's Triangle. And the museum up there, it's like the Cotton Museum, has got those wooden stamps, they're sort of rocking stamps that have got carved patterns in them that they use for printing then the cotton, which they also did on the edge of this Weaver's Triangle. So the design from that museum, from one of the original rocking printing devices, I then made into 3 gobos on the light, which then I projected onto this chimney. So again, it's got the relevance to the history and the site, but hopefully is contemporary in feel as well. And we developed some lenses for those spotlights. That meant that there was no light spillage whatsoever. So you could walk around that chimney, and there's not one bit of light that goes off the chimney. All the light goes directly on the chimney. And then, of course, it disappears at 2 a.m. or whatever. So during the day, there's nothing there whatsoever. So hopefully it was done with a very light touch, excuse the pun, but was also relevant. So relevant to people who locally or who knew about those sorts of things, but also I wanted it to stand up in its own right as a thing of beauty, like the National Design Guide says. So as a practitioner, that's what I want. So that if people know about it, that's great. It gives extra meaning. But if they don't, it's still, if you're a visitor to that area, it's still an enriching experience to go and be in that space.
Okay, fantastic. Oh, sorry. We've got a couple more images here.
Do you want me to quickly
talk? Yeah, just very quickly, that would be great.
The one on the left is the Central Square in Leeds, and I think it's 35 meters high, and they're lines of LEDs which are pre-programmed. But then every 4 hours, there's a local story in the history of Leeds that I've made a 5-minute lighting display that takes place. So whether it was when the first newspaper in Leeds was created, so there's like flutters of white, like pages coming down, or whatever, when, I can't remember what the other ones were, what the others were, but there were, the whole year, there's every 4 hours, there's some aspect of the history of Leeds is represented in that lighting. So again, if you know about it, then hopefully it will make sense. If you don't, hopefully there'll just be a beautiful lighting display anyway. The middle one is in Sheffield Persistence Works, and it was the first artist-built studios in the country. And I wanted that quite austere concrete facade just to have a gentleness to it. So I put stainless steel rods into the existing bolt holes of the building, so it's a very light touch again to the building. and then cold cathode tubes about 4 inches proud of the surface, just the colour just bleeds and just makes just a gentle colour onto the surface, and then reflects as the stainless steel, it slightly flexes in the wind, a bit like the hairs on your arm or something, and then so it just catches the light just a little bit in the breeze. And the one on the right is in Chester Street, and the floorscape, you can just see that the lights in the floor, they pulse a gentle blue pulse, because this is built on the culvert which goes through Chester Street. And that's the reason why Chester Street was built in that location, was because of the water that ran along that space, which obviously now been built over. So that bit of history is lost. So I was trying to reconnect it to that history by having this gently moving pulse of blue going through the floorscape. And you might be able to see that the floorscape is also the actual brickwork is made up. It's a special brick that Ibstock made for us. And the shape is the St. Cuthbert's cross, which is very well known locally. Again, if you don't know it, then that's fine. Hopefully it's a beautiful pattern. But if you do, it's because, well, it's all over the town, that symbol. It'll really mean something of significance to the people in Chester Street. And then the arch was built as a location to encourage nighttime activity, you know, so that people can come out and enjoy the space. So the lights under the arch made a sort of a stage area. So then you could have music or poetry or whatever. Then there were seats that you could just see around the edge, which are in granite, which also represented the the coal mining area, which Chester Street is. So it was like a seam of coal that went around the edge of the marketplace.
All right, fantastic, fantastic. Right, I'm going to stop sharing the screen now and go back to our discussion. I guess as good a place as any to jump off into this is, so we have the National Design Guide that's obviously being launched it's a very welcome document. I think anyone who's worked around the built environment will remember the kind of denuding of guidance and documents that went on probably from about 2010, and the idea was that you'd wind back on standards and wind back on kind of central design guides. So this being launched is obviously a recognition that this type of document has a role. The question to the panel is, what's it trying to solve? What are the current issues, do we think, in practice around creativity and placemaking, art and placemaking? Where are we today? I don't know who wants to come in on that. Oh, Alison, unmute yourself. Sorry, go on. We knew. Oh, go on, Alison. Okay. You just need. That's it.
Yeah. Sorry, thought I was jumping in very slowly through the technology. Well, I think one of the issues that we've maybe discussed before is about siloing and who is responsible for commissioning works. What powers do they have, and also perhaps what imagination do they have, and what precedents are they looking at? Where are they looking to for their examples? I think that there has become certainly a tendency for the public realm to be a functional place, and that there are lots of requirements to make traffic work, to make places safe, in inverted commas, and that issues of beauty, playability, loveliness, individual character might be seen to be more difficult to legislate for, and have kind of perhaps fallen off the list.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the introduction of language like delight and beauty into a guide of this stature. I mean, these are not unfamiliar words in the public realm or in the world of the built environment, but to see them in government guidance is quite rare. What do we think that signifies in terms of our understanding of where government are focusing now?
Well, I hope it's part of a new or a renewed recognition of the importance of place. We're at a very interesting crossroads as it happens. This wasn't anticipated when the guide came out, but we've all, or many of us recently, have had a very different relationship with public realm that isn't about function so much, and is about the opportunity to relieve the internal lives we've all been forced to lead recently and to consider journeys on foot and by bike as much as journeys in cars. And I think that the combination of this arriving at a time that then was unforeseen, but actually has allowed a reflection. Hopefully this is a new moment to kind of rewrite some of the rules in many ways.
Yeah, that's an interesting, we discussed in previous sessions, the kind of twin thing of people consuming the built environment in a new way, and as you say, just not just functional, but actually getting out into their place for much more leisure time than they probably had time for before. Sorry, go on, Fiona, jump in. You look like you were about to say.
It was quite interesting, you know, some of the examples that perhaps Jo showed us that actually, although not apparently functional, they do function. You know, they give you a sense of identity, a sense of ownership, a sense of recognition. And I think, you know, it's a sort of creative response that actually might be quite subliminal. You know, it's rather like, you know, trees or hedges. You don't quite know what it is, and you might not understand what, you know, the creative process is, but it responds to you on a subliminal, subconscious level. And I think that there's a real opportunity to actually say, well, you know, this is a creative process. And, you know, the National Design Guide talks about identity, you know, and movement and accessibility. And these are things that actually we can use, you know, we can justify, you know, creative responses, because they do actually tick those boxes if we think about it. But quite often we don't really think about it. We just think, oh, this is a piece of art. What does it look like?
Yeah.
I don't understand it. So I think, you know, that approach, you know, movement, how do you move through spaces? Where is your gateway? You know, I think there's opportunities, you know, if you look at examples, you know, SUDS, for example, on a very, you know, pragmatic level, we've got some, you know, examples of, you know, the National Gallery of Scotland or places where actually land form, sculptural form, right at the beginning, you know, if you've got a creative approach to how you do that, you can actually create really interesting spaces that people value, and how you deal with water or light or, you know, I wouldn't say signage, but rather than, oh, we want a sign, you know, can we have an artist to do a sign? It's, well, you know, how do we do these things, you know, subliminally, and how do we integrate right at the beginning this creative process with, you know, with other areas of works. You know, we're all working together to try and produce something, and we've all got different skills, whether that's engineers or artists, whatever they are, you know, or designers or architects, you know. I think just wanted to make that point, really.
I think the skills are out there. I don't think that's an issue at all, like you're saying. I think the issue is, how do we coordinate these skills? How do we make it happen so that these skills can, you know, work their magic, if you like? So how can we help councils to get on board more creative people or other creative people to help facilitate them? And there's, my experience of councils is they're often fantastic, but they're pressed for time and for money. And so I don't know whether, you know, how can we help them so that they can embrace them, getting creatives on board, and then planners, like we spoke in the preliminary meeting. There's an issue there. How can we help planners so that they can be as sort of risk embracing as possible, rather than risk averse, as sometimes is the case now, which I understand. But when you look at examples from around the world that are really memorable, that have worked in terms of urban design, often you know that there's been risk embracing taking place. So a simple thing like the Blue Road in Holland, in Drachten, or wherever, I can't, my pronunciation is probably wrong, but it's such a simple thing, but it transforms a whole road, gives that place identity immediately as a result. And there's loads of examples, like the there's the illuminated cycleways as well. I think there's one in Poland and another one in Holland as well. One's solar powered, so you think the one in Poland is solar powered. You think, this is brilliant. This is so simple in one way and completely transforms our environment. And so it's, in a way, it's not the actual ideas, because I think that people have got the ideas. It's how can we facilitate the ideas to fruition?
So where do we think, I mean, we talked about this in the pre-meeting about where we think, but two things we talked about were whereabouts in the process do we need to start thinking like this? And we all kind of lament that in our experience, it's always seen as an add-on. It's a thing you do at the end once you've made all the important decisions according to kind of the general way these things run. And we also had a discussion about policy versus skill and whether this is something you could legislate for. Is the problem, as we see it today, that we just don't have the right process in place and we're not including the right people at the right time? Or is it something a bit more fundamental? Is it just a lack of understanding that these maybe aren't different things when we're talking about place quality? These are the same thing and it's just another tool to get there. I don't know where the weight of that falls at the moment in your view.
Well, I think it's always great to have a visionary manifesto at the start of a project. And on design review, we're always very interested to sort of get in early and be able, that the most impact can be made the kind of earliest this exists in the sort of strategy for development. However, I also want to suggest that the built environment is not a static place, and the idea that unless something is embedded on day one, we can't affect change and we can't reflect on the places that we're living in and look at ways to make them better. We're in a culture at the moment where as well as the pressing issues with coronavirus and hopefully post-coronavirus, we're also in a climate change situation, and the sort of tabula rasa clean slate rarely exists now, and the issues with development is the sense of a sort of red boundary within which we are going to effect change. And actually what we should be looking at is our inherited place and how we can make small adjustments to that, as well as have big plans for new things.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to comment on kind of that, on the kind of structural issues?
That often it's not actually necessarily even finance. Often it can be just will that can make a difference, and it's the relationship to risk can be central to it. So I remember seeing the.
Can you see the poll result, Joe? Can you see the poll that we put out, and that's on screen now? Oh, yes. About what kind of risk and barrier to delivering this stuff. I don't know if that probably feeds into what you're saying now. I don't know if you can see it on your screen.
Yes, I can. I've got it here. That's
yeah.
Okay.
So it's not
expenses. Yes, I can see that. Yeah. So the main one there is the expenses are too high, which I actually was just the point I was just about to make, is that it's possible, I think, to have some of these things without them being more expensive. There's often a budget. So for just as one absolutely tiny example, railings. There's a budget for railings, to go over a bridge or whatever. But if you get, so you can have the pragmatic railings that are banged up, but you can have an artist come in or a creative come in, and the musical railings in San Diego, they function as railings, but they transform that place. They give it identity, they give it story. Children love it. People just want to push their brolly along it to make the sound. The music as it goes on. It's just a simple creative twist to a fairly, pragmatic situation. And that's what creative minds can do, it seems to me, is that they can make absolutely any situation, they can make it into something that has a story, that has identity, that has fun, has joy, has beauty in it. It's really simple. And yes, I think that the poll is right, that expenses is absolutely an issue. But it's not necessarily the key issue, because it's the will to do it. So there is a budget for glass, say, and there's a budget for manifestation lines on glass. But the manifestations, they don't have to be little squares, series of squares going along a window. It can be anything. It can take 1 day's designing and everything else is the same cost, you know, and you've transformed the building. So it's that will.
Yeah, Fiona.
I think that's a really, sorry, am I unmuted? I think that's a really good point, because actually, you know, it's like saying, does good design cost more? Well, it can cost more, you know, you can choose, but actually, I think involvement in the creative process does not necessarily always cost more. And in fact, it can make a saving. I've worked on projects where, you know, there was roof gardens where, you know, for example, Lace Market Square, where the commission was originally for, you know, we'll have a water feature and this, that and the other, and it was a roof garden, and actually it just wasn't appropriate. So where we couldn't put the trees, we looked at sculptural trees, and we actually made savings in certain areas. So I think, you know, again with landform, you know, how you treat suds, you know, how you use landform, right? You can, you know, lighting, you know, getting Jo involved or various people right at the early stage. Obviously, there's a, you know, there's a fee, or you know, text or words. That's the community involvement. You know, there's a longevity to some of these things. If you're working, you know, on the written word, working on projects, actually, you have a lot. That project can have a lifespan that extends way beyond any physical element. So it isn't always physical, and it doesn't always cost much. It is about actually having the vision to say, well, we want to do something different here. What can we do? How can we bring something to this project? And I think that does have to be looked at really early on. So decisions have to be made. Well, you know, how can we do this? Can we afford to do this? Do we want to do this? Is it more expensive? Is it cheaper? You know, I think it's a vision, which is not culturally, historically being part of how our planning system in the last 30 years, maybe. I mean, when we go back beyond earlier on, maybe it's different.
Yeah, we want to talk about, I've got a note to talk about where certainly where kind of government influence in the quality of the built environment came from historically. But before we move on to that, I seem to spend an inordinate amount of time arguing with house builders about where they need to spend their money in order to deliver quality. And it seems to me a lot of what is being said here is that if you overlay a bit of creative thinking with the money you were going to spend anyway, so be it a boundary treatment or something, or a lighting scheme, versus doing installation art where it's an object that costs money, it seems that you could either save money by creatively adapting what you were going to build anyway, or at least you're going to come out around cost neutral, and you'll get that uplifting quality. And I just, and Fiona, you'll know, because we work together on many of these projects, where if you're trying to ask house builders to spend lots of money on buildings, they're going to tell you to sod off. They've costed these things down to the last wall tie, and I see a lot of planners in particular, and I understand that the pressures from kind of the people in the background and members and stuff to change buildings and make buildings bespoke and so on and so forth. It seems to me we could spend more intelligently, get higher quality, and frankly more people get to enjoy it, because we're all consumers of the public realm. But we don't often do the same for buildings. Buildings are quite private. There's a question here in the chat, and I just want to get this from Rob. He just says that there will always be a conversation about needing to store bespoke elements for replacing things, and there is an emphasis in the National Design Guide about kind of robustness and maintenance. And I suppose if you are using your public realm as art, is that a problem? Is there a kind of extra whole life cost that we need to be mindful of?
I don't think it has to be that way. I think you can treat the creative aspect of the built environment in the same way as any other pragmatic part of the built environment. But I do think there's also an interesting opportunity to say, are there areas of an environment where we don't embed that longevity, where we actually continually create opportunity for change? Right. So either there are zones, or there's an integrated sort of, areas where actually there are temporary interventions of whatever sort. And that can be part of a lifeblood and part again of the identity of a space. So then you don't have the issues of necessarily designing for 30 years, 50 years, or whatever it is. Actually, the important thing is there to think we're embracing change. The sensibilities change. Like, if you want to say 30 years ago, sensibility was quite different. In 30 years' time, it might be quite different again. It's likely to be so. So in some ways, it's quite an exciting opportunity to say part of our environment embraces that change. And the sustainability that you mentioned, Alison, that is absolutely an issue. We don't know what the state's going to be like in 30 years' time. So to sort of accept flux, but sort of beautifully, not so that it's ramshackle, but accept it as a positive thing, might give creative opportunity for a community and for all of the community, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, the lovely thing about the public realm is it's external and or tends to be the best of it, and that the opportunity for seasonal change, the opportunity for day to night change, it's a very different set of challenges and opportunities if you're designing outdoors rather than designing in a fixed environment. And I think that things that happen naturally, weathering, maybe even decay, can be very interesting parts of the flavour, and certainly sort of seasonal changes, weather changes and so on are what we love, you know, and we use a piece of land differently in the snow as we use it in the bright sunshine, but we can enjoy both of those things.
Yeah, I mean, in the last session, one of the panel members made the point that, and it's made in the National Design Guide as well, but the activity occurring in a place is as much integral to its character as the design of it itself. And I guess from what you've been saying just then, if you can build in a level of dynamism into the actual fabric of the place, then that was going to be reflected in how people use it, which could add a whole area of intrigue and interest. Alison, I want to get you to explain this because you made an interesting point in the pre-meeting and I want everyone to hear it. You mentioned your work with CABE and the Design Council, and then we started talking about rolling, where all that came from. So I think just for most people, it would be quite interesting to know what the history is and where CABE came from, and we talked about that. So I don't know if you want to just do a couple of minutes on that. That would be great if you could.
Okay, well, I don't have a full history for you here.
No, sorry, I put you right on the spot there, sorry.
For those who may not even have heard of CABE, that was the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment. And it actually grew out, and it was an advocacy organisation, really, to promote good design in all its forms in this country. It actually grew from the Royal Fine Arts Commission, and it's an interesting consideration to think that of that relationship between art and the built environment that seemed to be a very natural progression at the time. Also, we were considering that, again, at this moment we find ourselves in, we can glance back to the post-war moment when the NHS was founded, and we've been celebrating that collectively across the country. But it was also a time when the Arts Council was established, and I think it's quite interesting to think that a kind of progressive society should and has embedded art as a really important part of our cultural identity, you know, and here we are where potentially art in its widest sense may be one of the biggest casualties of the COVID sort of dramas. And that and yet we have now an absolutely unprecedented sum of money being put towards that, and how that might play out in built environment terms should be a real opportunity.
I haven't fully drilled into that funding package. I know the kind of headline figures seemed good and they seem high and very welcome, if maybe a bit too late. However, my understanding is a lot of that is to do with the upkeep of venues rather than giving money to the who are often, and I'm sure most of us here are either freelancers or you know, you go in and out of projects and stuff. If you don't have the income, you're not going to be able to practice. And my understanding of that that package is that it wasn't quite as targeted as it could have been. Is maybe that's more reflective again of just a lack of understanding generally of how this stuff works, rather than, no point having theatres if you've got no people to fill them and you've got no artists to fill them with content. So it does worry me a little bit that package isn't quite going to do the job. And well, you're right.
It's our collective responsibility now to make clear what is at stake and to advocate hard for the things that matter. And I just, maybe, I don't know if this is the right moment, but I just wanted to maybe ask Jo, I'm very interested, the work that you showed was lovely, and certainly there is a role for very integrated and what you've called egoless art.
Yeah.
But I just want to make a little pitch for ego-driven art as well, and even for public art in its kind of traditional sense, and that I think that we are an incredibly creative society, actually, and even if you talk in sort of capitalist terms, the creative arts has brought huge contribution to the economy of our society, and some of that is top down and some of that is bottom up and some of that slides in sideways, and I think that there should be space for all of that, really, and if you look at the new towns which grew up under sort of benefactors of their development corporations, they were sponsoring art in all directions there, and there is a legacy of people like Barbara Hepworth and Henry Moore in literally around the corner in housing estates, but there are also the sort of concrete cows and the community art that grew out of very grassroots activities, and I'd like to advocate for sort of all of that, really, as we move forward.
I would agree with that, because I think there's a whole approach to how artists work and who they work for and what their briefs are and how they work for themselves. And I think actually this COVID has shown, one thing that it has shown is how people really strive for creativity. We've seen so many examples on YouTube, of people who actually didn't touch a paintbrush or or have been doing, CD covers, LP covers, a whole plethora of music, sound, poetry that people, they're writing books, all these things that actually people haven't done since they were probably at junior school, and they've sort of had it drummed out of them. And then, and I think everybody actually inherently has, an opportunity to explore and do something. And I think they recognise that. And I think, it's sort of, how can we harness this and say, actually, people do value these things. They don't quite necessarily know what they see outside, or you don't always understand what the artist is trying to do. Does that matter? Do you look at a painting, do you look at anything and respond to a tree on a fundamental level and then understand, well, why is that tree making me feel good or whatever? So I think, we, although there is a casualty here, I think there's a real opportunity for us, as you say, to sort of re-look at our whole approach to the external environment. How do we look at the local environment that we live in? What can we do? Is it topiary? Is it lighting? Is it, people outside dancing? I think there's a whole approach to what art is in its broadest sense.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think in the pre-meet we talked about this very thing where people were kind of spontaneously reimagining the spaces that they're now finding themselves in more time. And people talked about chalk art and things like that. What's been going on? What's the general feel? Because it's happening. I mean, where I'm living, I remember just outside my door, the local kids did a big thank you NHS mural on the floor, and no one damaged it, no one washed it away. It was very good, kind of community building, actually, and it was an opportunity. So I think, and you've got to have space to do that. That's a functionality issue as well as a kind of quality issue. And what kind of things are we seeing spring up spontaneously?
That was an example there of a temporary piece of design in a way in your environment, which works really well. And whatever, 3 weeks later, it's not there. And
Yeah.
that seems to be part of the vibrancy of an environment that is to be embraced. And the issue about ego that you picked up on there, Alison, I think you're right that it's great to incorporate all the different types, because basically the built environment or an environment reflects the community, and the community constitutes all sorts of different people. So it's the different fingerprints of all the community in some ways should have access to expression in an environment. So the ego, it can be a quiet ego and contribute an absolute central point. It could be a loud ego and contribute as part of something as well. So the issue of how the ego works is almost like it's sort of like a separate issue. The key to me is not so much, in a way, the ego. The key is the quality that comes out of it, whatever it is, that you would hope that it would go through a quality filter of some sort. But that's where, in a way, that having some of the temporary access for temporary interventions is great, because then that can be even more risk embracing. Because if the quality isn't brilliant, if that chalk drawing on your street is absolutely diabolical, it's not there permanently. It's not like it's embedded in bronze, and you've got to now step outside to your building and look at that every single day and think, oh no, rather than be uplifted. But it's hopefully it's a beautiful thing, it's temporary, but there's a room for great risk within that strata of creative output.
In my experience, there might be an ego barrier a bit further upstream, which is a lot of, and I'll put myself in that category, a lot of people like me don't necessarily want people coming in and putting their stamp on our designs.
Yes.
You know, if I'm designing a layout or an estate or something a bit like that, probably the last thing on my mind is I want someone else coming in and finishing it off for me. But that's probably very harmful actually to the quality. Do you find that you kind of butt heads with other architects, other types of architects, when you say things like, why don't you just leave this to the people to go away and do and put their stamp on? And they're like, oh no, but it doesn't fit in my beautiful, I don't know, classical Baroque style that I wanted to do, where everything is a set piece.
Garry, this is an outrageous admission.
I'm
educated.
Yeah, I know. I'm off for re-education after this.
Yeah. See me afterwards. Yeah, I think it's actually really important that we embed in our next generation and advocate to our current generation that that place does actually belong to us all.
Yeah.
That is the whole point. That's what makes public realm special, is it's not private realm. And that I think that, as designers, we have a responsibility for advocacy. So if there is a vision behind something that we feel is at risk of being spoilt or diluted, then part of our responsibility is in the communication of that vision and the value of that vision. However, we also have a responsibility to maybe reflect why we feel it's spoilt or diluted.
Yeah.
Whether
I just want to say I
really
didn't really think that. I just said that for effect.
Devil's advocate. Okay. Well, maybe we've all had those moments, but I think
I've seen it happen. Yeah, I've definitely seen it happen.
It's a kind of carrot and stick approach, isn't it? Your and sermon, let's say. So there's a bit that is about sharing your vision and but there is also a bit about being adaptable to other people's and seeing this as a kind of collaborative art. Yeah.
And I think that's key to, do you sort of say, right, I've done my bit now, get the artist, oh, you've ruined it, I don't like what you do, oh, we'll show it the public, we'll get the public to design it. I think it's how you actually, work together and have art is in an exhibition space, purely the framework of the artist. You can do what you want, really, but when you're actually in the public domain, it does serve a function in many ways. So it is a sort of applied art, whatever it is, because it, whether that's identity, character, placemaking, it does have a function. So there is a responsibility to understand that, and I think it's how you work and communicate, perhaps, you know, how how does everybody within the team and outside communicate, and at what level do you do it? And I think we've all been in situations where, you know, we've been asked to design something by somebody else, you know, here's a piece of public art, we want you to make it. And you think, well, hang on, that's not our role as an artist. But just the same, if you're putting something outside, maybe right at that early stage, well, certainly there needs to be a sort of, not the brief, and maybe that's where a art liaison officer or somebody can help to actually bring, you know, sometimes you might be out here and somebody else might be out here, because you're all very different. And so if somebody can bring those together and actually help with those links, that could be the role, you know, the role of an arts officer, really, to sort of, or the team communicator, to say, hang on, well, planners, this is what your understanding is, you know, this is what your understanding is, engineer, you know. So actually it's how we sort of understand each other's needs and are able to work within that framework, I think. Okay.
No, I'd agree. We've got 8 minutes, and we do have to finish on time with this one. Sometimes we've run over. Unfortunately, there's other webinars that are going to steal some of our attendees, so we've got to finish on time. I want to quickly go back to this possibly a false division between functionality and quality. Alison, you mentioned in our pre-meet the Welsh Play Manifesto. Interestingly to me was what you said, the impact it was having on the kind of functionality of the place. So I don't know if you want to spend a couple of minutes just explaining what that is, and then we can talk more generally about the role of making places that people want to use, and where the quality and arts agenda can actually achieve those functionality aims.
Right. Okay. Well, just very briefly,
you've got 7 minutes. Go.
Yes. The point we were briefly discussing then. So play has been defined by Play England, I believe, as children's expression of culture, which I think is quite an interesting way to consider it. And we saw with Jo's very first example, children will appropriate space, a bit like nature, and this example of the streets being chalked on, and the same happened here on our road. And it was a lovely moment about 5 days into lockdown, was when children had felt the confidence to start playing actively on the street and making their mark. In Wales is the first country in the world, in fact, I believe, to legislate for children's play. And there is a local authority duty there called the Play Sufficiency Duty. And that is effectively auditing their public realm with an assessment every 3 years to establish that it is sufficiently playable, and that the opportunities are there, formal and informal, for children to be welcome and creative and take risks in the public realm. So that's just an interesting consideration in terms of identifying different parts of our community and what their needs are in the public realm, perhaps those with less voice than some, to be sat round the table making decisions about what it looks like. Sorry, I can't remember whether that was everything you asked me to comment.
No, it was. I mean, one of the things that's always struck me is that there seems to be a bit of a gulf between the kind of what we see as practice and just standard practice, and then what the data is telling us works and doesn't work. And we all want, say, for example, better, safer streets. The data is telling us that one of the key things you can do is just put more people into them, make them more usable for things other than just the transit of vehicles, for example. And play is a key, the kind of Woonwerf system, the Dutch Woonwerf system, where they kind of use kids as inherent traffic calming, for example. It is culturally unacceptable in this country. However, the data for that kind of thing is very, very strong in terms of safety, regulating traffic speed, that kind of thing, making the streets and spaces more viable to more people. And yet we just don't do it. And I wonder if there's a role for us as kind of practitioners to back our creative agenda with hard data that says this gives you more of what you want. It's not just pretty. Being pretty means it's X, Y, and Z. anyone want to comment on that, or is that just me on my soapbox?
No, there's lots of research, and there was, I mean, just in terms of this playability of streets, there's research from Newcastle University that these play streets, which is a technical term of sort of taking over your street for part of the week, and allowing it to be car free and allowing children to play, that there are tangible results, both in terms of sort of children's well-being, reduced obesity and things like that, but also in terms of the general connectedness of the community and the benefits for all demographics, older people and so on, seeing and hearing children playing out in their neighbourhoods. So I think that there is a lot of research out there, and maybe, you know, part of our responsibility on design review panels and elsewhere is to really know about it, speak it out, advocate for it, and try and embed it in the policy opportunities that there are, but also in the kind of hearts and minds of developers.
Yeah, well, sorry Fiona, Design Midlands have recently launched a new type of design review, which is more about streets and spaces than it is anything else. So that they're kind of pushing that agenda. Sorry Fiona, go on, come back in.
I just think there's a real opportunity to use some of these key terms that have a real sort of value, like, you know, playability, you know, rather than informal play, which is obviously logs and, you know, the same old stuff, but just made out of wood. You know, playability, you can actually look at spaces, and it's similar to sort of sticky streets. You know, what is a street? You know, it's a street actually which encourage people to stop and, you know, and I think these are sort of terms that actually, you know, they're quite good names actually, and they say something, and I think, you know, they describe actually what the product you want rather than a sort of criteria of what you're going to put in it. So
right.
Terms like that are really helpful to use, and, you know, it's an opportunity to look at those.
I think there's also the promotion of streets to play, nice to hear children in the streets and use them to stop cars going too fast is an interesting one, because at what point is there a tipping point where if they've got to 17 or 18 and they're playing in your street, is that still to be, you know, does everybody still love that as much?
Yeah, definitely. I want to advocate for 17 and 18-year-olds who, broadly speaking, are lovely and they're our future.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. I think so too. I think that's why I think it's not necessarily just a children thing. I think it becomes a public space thing, but it has revealed a myopic view towards children, because it's a human thing, isn't it? It's an appreciation of play. It's an appreciation of being human, rather than just children. That seems to me part of the sort of the categorization again, rather than it being, well, it's a public space. And how lovely to have this open public space, not just that's where children stop cars coming.
Yeah. No, that's I think that's true. Yeah, there are definitely some forgotten demographics when it comes to public realm design in general and play space design in particular. I'm conscious that we are into our last minute. This is we're actually finished in our last minute. Before I bid you all farewell and thank you, is there any kind of pressing points that you feel we haven't covered? I think it's been a great discussion, so thank you. But if there's anything you really feel you need to say, now's your time.
One point I would like to say. So we have talked about how art can add value without adding cost, and, you know, this was a kind of important conversation we've been having through CABE and design review panels and so on. However, it can be more costly, and that can also be a great thing to invest money in. And I think that I just want to sort of put that piece of advocacy out there, that there's been a comment from one of our audience about Alaska designating 1% for art program, and, you know, these kind of is great value for money, and let's just accept that we don't have to produce beautiful environments by stealth, by you know, claiming that there is no cost. You know, that's kind of devaluing in a way the creative process that makes places lovely. And actually homes and buildings are a big investment in our culture. People do spend an awful lot of money on them. It's the one thing they do spend money on. And if the sort of streetscapes and public realm that surround them, as well as those buildings, is poor, then that's not just a missed opportunity, but that's just a false economy, really. So
it leaves a ton of value on the table. It really does. Yeah.
In for spending money where it's required.
Yeah. No, fantastic. Does anyone else want to say anything before I boot you all out and send you on your way?
Well, apart from that, it's just a very good point. I thought it was tremendous. I was clapping here.
Yeah. Well done. All right. Panel, I'm going to have to draw this to a close now. We're just running a tiny bit over. I just want to say to everybody who's attended, thank you ever so much for coming along and coming to all these sessions. Actually, they've been great fun. The recording of this session will be available on our website, on our various websites, and you'll all have the information sent to you. It just remains for me to say thank you very much, panel. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's been fantastic, and it's a shame we couldn't carry on. But thank you very much. All right, you guys take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.